Okay. Welcome,
Um,
everyone. And we are just about to, Karen, you had just asked about the use of the verb in the passage where Hagar's boy Ishmael and Isaac, there's something going on. What is it? And it's the same Hebrew word that's used later. You want to rephrase that for the audience that just came in? Who?
yeah, I'm actually referring back to an early episode of Toro Pearls with Nehemiah and Jono,
Yeah.
and they discussed this, and Nehemiah seemed to lean towards, the word molest, not necessarily the word mock.
Yeah.
Um, and I almost see it more as, uh, and this is what I was wondering if you would look up for me. Who's the author of that? Like, is that P or Y or
Give me the verb. Are we talking about, let's see, is it 21:8 or 21:9?
Yeah, 21:9.
Okay, let's look. First of all, I'll just go on a record, and I think Nehemiah is a brilliant guy, but I don't agree that that means to molest, if that's what he said, and I trust you. But I do know that there are commentators who say that, but I just don't think it has to be. Let's see. Okay, so let's look at verse 9. And that in chapter 21 is E, okay? And then the other passage, do you remember where the other passage was, the verse?
6, 8,
What verse?
8,
Verse 8 of what chapter? I'm sorry, I missed that. 20,
26.
26, okay, 26. 26, 8. Let's just see. Good exercise here. This is good fun. 26, 8. And looking in my handy dandy Torah tablet, verse 8 is going to be, oh, it goes back a ways. It's J. It's J. So let me look at the Hebrew in 26, 8. Genesis 26, 8. This is the fun stuff. Okay, and it came to pass, Abimelech looked out the window and saw Isaac was, ASV says, with, sporting with, oh, it's the same. It is the same word. Yeah. Yeah. And behold, Yitzhak mutzachek et Rivka ishto. And Isaac, and behold, Isaac, which means laughing, and laughter, what was laughing with Rivka, his wife. Yeah, so it's just they're being playful, they're madly in love. We know this about the story, but a lot of people will do things like that. And I don't know why. Part of it is different people have different views, but I've read rabbinic commentators that say that when the boys are little, that Ishmael, it's the same word. He's playing around with him, probably taking it too far, like older brothers do, and so you get this idea, and some say, yeah, he was molesting him, or it was something sexual, and I don't see it has to be that. In fact, I think it is not that at all.
So author H, I forget who's author H.
Um, well, according to the documentary hypothesis, there's not an author H, but it could be another view that is saying, some other author, I don't know that one in particular. I'd have to look at it and see where you remember where you saw that?
No.
Okay, no problem. But
Huh.
what we have here is, interestingly enough, and that's an excellent observation that you brought up. You see that whatever one is doing, and both of these, by the way, are in the same story, and we see that even different sources use the same vocabulary. We get subtle clues that talk about the beauty of how it all came together. Whether a person believes that Moses penned and pulled together all these stories, or if you're into more of an academic view, it doesn't matter. All of these views are interesting. For instance, when Hagar, the way that Sarah treats Hagar, the language is the same as what we find later in the story of the Egyptians oppressing the Israelites. So it's almost like, wait a minute. Now that's an interesting plot twist that you have someone in the story early representing the people of Israel oppressing an Egyptian, and it's the old saying of what comes around goes around, you know? So the language is a clue. It's words like that and phrases.
Yeah, I see it almost like there are certain things here and there in the text that kind of jump out at me as a little bit propaganda-ish. Like from early on, they want you to view this person and their descendants as bad.
Yeah,
Like Ham does this thing with Noah and Canaan bad. Early on, they want you to see Canaan as
yeah,
something distasteful.
right.
And I can see that a little bit here with Ishmael. The writer wants the reader to see Ishmael and as kind of in a negative context.
Yeah. No, I agree. Jonah and I brought a little bit of this into our conversation. It may be one that we've recorded and haven't aired yet, but there is this idea. All ancient people do it, and unfortunately, modern people do this as well. Even going into what led to ultimately into persecution of various people groups, but in particular the Jews. They're characterized a certain way, caricatures, and they try to paint them as not quite human. You read the story, for instance, in Genesis 18 moving into 19, and the writer wants us to know, if you look across the Jordan, you see the people of Moab and Ammon. Now they're our enemies. So guess what? Let me tell you this scandalous story. You know how they came about? Well, so what had happened was, is that the girls got their daddy drunk and slept with him, one right after the other. And you can see people in the ancient world with their hand over their mouth going, no, yeah, yeah, it happened. But again, we do see that kind of thing where the other, I mean, this is almost human nature, and you would think that we'd get over it, but we see a lot of things like this surface in, various pieces of history, and this is one of those, maybe. So
Yeah, I
I
think we
don't know.
talked about once in a something like this in when oh goodness, it's in Judges, and they're trying to uh disrepudiate a son of Moses, like a priest of Moses, and it's with I can't remember the guy who steals the silver from his mom, and she curses him, and then she finds out her son stole it, and she's like, "Oh, never mind, let's make an idol."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
That,
they're trying
yeah.
to use certain language to make this priest look bad.
And the other piece of that story that you're talking about is, and a lot of people miss this, I think it's Judges 18. One of the things that's interesting is that the name, he's a priest, but he's a son of, instead of Moses, which the text did say, a noon is inserted, so it says Manasseh,
Right.
because the writer doesn't want us to know that some of Moses' sons were uh, performing as priests. And again, you have to think. Now, look, I know a lot of people. Some of this is new to some people, like you're saying. What are you suggesting here? Well, we're suggesting that there are evidences of editorial work which has gone on in the text of the Hebrew Bible. So, but that's just another example. That's a good example, Karen.
Another one I noticed too is in the story of the concubine of Gibeah,
Yeah,
when the Levite goes into the town and they make a reference to the men of the city being like the men of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's kind of what they're referring to in
yeah.
that whole
They
situation.
take the girl and abuse her and basically
I
rape
know.
her to death. That's one of the worst stories I've ever read, by the way.
And it's
Um,
like, why is this even in here? And
yeah,
I mean, there's going to be. I know they're trying to make an argument for a king,
Yeah.
but the story makes no sense at all. If
It
you're looking at their culture, and they're supposed to be following the books of the law here, and it just doesn't make any sense.
I remember I don't remember how old I was, but I remember I think the first time the story of Sodom and Gomorrah really hit me. And I mean like, where the guys are banging on the door and stuff and Lot is like, "Well, I can't let you have my guests, but I'm happy to send my girls out."
Yep.
I I just that kind of stuff for years, and I remember I think I was told at the time, and I have been told subsequently, well, you just have to understand the ancient world. You see, the idea is that somebody comes under your roof and you really take care of them. You're like, yeah, well, your girls come under your roof every day. You're going to send your daughters out. I just don't. I I think one of the things that is one of my pet peeves now, many times people feel the need to defend a story that's in the Bible, even when the biblical writers don't intend for you to defend it. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
the biblical writer wants you to go, oh my goodness, that is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. Not to say, yeah, well, it was just a culture back then, Ross. You just have to learn more about the culture. I think we ought to be shocked by some of the things that we read in these ancient stories. We really should.
I don't think it was the culture. I mean, the story of the men of Shechem, I think that completely contradicts the other, being part of the culture. I mean, a man messes with their sister and they go kill the entire town.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me
Hmm.
girls out the door.
Doesn't endear you to everyone there, right?
Right? Anywho,
Yeah. Well, there's some look, I love the stories of the Bible. I don't want people to get the wrong
yeah, I
idea,
have.
but I want to always and forever treat these stories the way that the author wanted them to be understood. Like, here's another example of the same kind of thinking. We have this idea, like in rabbinic literature, sometimes they'll excuse Aaron for his involvement in making the golden calf, and so some of the rabbinic writings will say, well, it was that mixed multitude. And you're like, well, who is that? Well, it's just the non-Jews. See, they wanted to, because they like idols. And you're like, well, it looks like, I think I've read in the Bible that Israel was pretty fond of idols too. And it says that Aaron led this bad act. And God was so mad with him, he wanted to kill him. That's what it says in Deuteronomy. But we tend to cover for that. And we see this kind of thing throughout the biblical text. Well, I always say, be honest to Moses, honest to God, honest to the text. Whenever I look now at the biblical stories, I give you this, a classic example of editorial cleaning, cleansing the story. If you put Kings and Chronicles side by side, by the way, that link is always in the description of my videos. I want people to get that book if they don't. It's a harmony of Chronicles, Kings, and so forth. But if you read the accounts, Kings tells us that King David decided not to go to war in this particular time. He stays back. He sees the beautiful Bathsheba bathing on her roof. He takes her, gets her pregnant, has her husband killed. All of those things. We all know the story, okay? And then Chronicles has the story right before that about the war, and it skips all of that detail and picks up after those troublesome texts, because the writer of Chronicles is a court official and they don't want bad press about the king. I mean, we see this kind of stuff in the text, and that's one of the things. That's why Seth and I are talking a lot, throughout the week, and the idea of independent biblical research is what we were talking about. And that's why I like calling myself an independent biblical researcher, because I'm not influenced by. And I think all of you who really study the text are independent in your thinking. Anyway, the text have some problems that we have to face. So,
I always read it now like, what is this trying to tell me? I don't read it like everything in here is true.
yeah,
But I do like, okay, they're telling a story, they're telling it for a reason. What's the reasoning? Why are they telling the story?
yeah,
Because there's no king in the land, everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes, and mob rule is bad.
yeah,
Or, we want you later on down the road, we're going to wipe out this entire people group and we want you to not like them in the beginning.
yeah,
Like why just kind of it's almost like it's a parable a little bit, or explaining why they're doing what they're doing.
yeah. When you get these, so the other thing, and it kind of piggybacks off of what you're saying there. I like the idea that I'm not casting doubt on the veracity of every one of these stories. Like I'm not going through going, nope, nope, nope. What I'm saying is, let's begin by reading the stories for what they say. And if they say this is bad, let's say that's bad. Let's not cover for bad things. The other thing is, like you said, this is one thing I like to do. You're like, why would a story of a Lot being, basically tricked by his daughters, and then they make babies together? I mean, why is that story in there? Who would write such a thing? Well, I guarantee you that it wasn't a Moabite or an Ammonite. I bet if you ask them, now, do you boys, you trace your family line, you come to the same stick, don't you? I mean, I mean, that's the idea. It's like you don't fork. Your family tree doesn't fork, is what you're saying. And that's just a mean thing to say, right? Now some of people online right now may be going, yeah, and that's exactly what happened, Ross. And maybe it is, but it doesn't. I'll give you one more example talking about these Moabites and the Ammonites. Up until August 19th, 1869, we didn't know very much about them at all. I mean, you could point across the way and you could say, hey, that's where the ancient Moabites and the Ammonites lived. And, and somebody in the back would say, you mean those people that are related to one another real closely? And you're like, yeah. Well, so remember, we have a story of Second Kings in Second Kings chapter 3 of a battle that takes place. King of Israel, the king of Judah, and then they're together fighting the Moabites. And we have the story. We have the story in Second Kings chapter 3. Well, up until this discovery in August of 1869, it was the only story we had about that. There was no other evidence. But then with the discovery of the Moabite stone, the Mesha stela, we get the story from that side. And it is remarkable. Now, I think, if I remember, I'll have to freshen up on my notes, but, I've written on this and I've talked about it, but I think there are more than 18 points of congruence between the story on the Moabite stone, the Mesha stela, and the story that we get in 2 Kings 3. They're not all the same, but there are some very interesting things that we can learn from studying these other accounts too. And anyway, I just think that it's fascinating to peer into some of these and to question, why would someone say this or write this, or why would a text clearly be changed in certain instances? And we know that certain things were changed. Like back to my story about King David in Chronicles. Chronicles skips over that bad. We are not going to talk about. You go, well, why would that be? I don't know. I mean, look at modern politics. It's the same thing. It's propaganda. Sometimes you're getting the story from a group that doesn't want bad press on the leader. Got to clean it up. Anyway, that's some stuff. That's what I think about in my spare time.
Right.
Anything else, Karen?
I think a certain rabbi is accusing us of starting our own religion again, but that's all.
Yeah, well, message me about that because I've been looking for a reason to miss sleep and I need to stay up at night because I've got a lot of work to do. So maybe I'll read that. And
Yeah.
yeah, there are a lot of people. There's anytime fundamentalism is challenged, it becomes a threat. And it becomes a threat because it's much better. It's easier to keep people in line if they don't read or think for themselves. Now, the beauty of what I try to do here, if there is a beautiful side to it, is I open up every week for anyone to challenge and say, and that happens. I mean, and I'm not a mean person. If somebody doesn't agree with me, it's okay. I'm okay with it. But I would love for some of those who are very critical to give answers rather than just say, because I've read some of it. I got a lot of people that send me notes and say, "Hey, did you see this?" And it does help me to stay up at night. So good stuff. Just if you get a chance, just say whoever said whatever they said. Just say Ross said, "Blessed is he who is not offended by me." That's what Ross said.
Okay.
They'll like that.
All right.
Hey, thank you, Karen. Stick around. You'll probably have some more good input as we go.
All right.
All the way from France. Hello, Miss Carolyn. Let's see. I got you unmuted. Let me see. Wait a minute. Now
Okay,
try.
how's that?
That's it.
Can you hear me?
I
Okay,
got you.
cool.
I got you.
Okay. One of the things about Ishmael having a theophoric ending on his name
Uh-huh.
is interesting to think about in this way. If Ishmael had been given the promise, if his line was the one that God promised, because of how his current progeny deal with their God, i.e., the Arabs and the Mohammedans, and how they worship their God single mindedly. They are willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. They take their religion seriously. Christianity, the Jews, the Israelites never did that. From one generation to the next, they forgot God. They put up idols. They went into captivity. You name it. They forgot their God. They are not like the Ishmaelites and his progeny. So we'd better be thankful if we are of the Israelite stock. We'd better be thankful God promised it to us first, because they would have left us in the dust long ago. Long ago.
Well, one thing is for certain, and I know that all of us look at these texts and look at what's around us. One thing that is very commendable, and I think it's part of your point, is that if you look at most Muslims that I know and that I've been around, whether in the States, not in the States so much, I live in the deep South and we just don't have a lot that I know of, but in the land of Israel, in the Middle East or whatever, there is a very strong dedication to the faith. Is that part of what you're saying? That they're very, very much inclined to follow to the T?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will mention though that they do have one failing that the sons of Israel do not have. And that is they do not appreciate their women, not nearly to the extent that Israelite men do. Um, they to put them under a burqa, to not allow them to have education, to not allow them to drive a car, which it depends upon what country you're in the Ishmaelite lands, but they have always kept their women under wraps. Now, whether that was because they were so sexually on fire, they were going to mount every woman they saw, and any woman who wasn't under the protection of a man or covered was asking for it, I don't know. I don't know what their frame of mind is. But Israelite men, uh, most of them are not that way. Some of them are. We're taught it talks in the scriptures about some of the men who neighed after their neighbor's wife, etc.
Yeah.
So we don't come off squeaky clean, but we are different in that way. But we definitely are not as strong-minded in our relationship with God and obeying God as they are worshiping their God. We could learn from them. We really could learn from them in that facet.
And I know what you're saying. I do follow. And I also know that there are exceptions in every case to all of those points, but sometimes generalizations and stereotypes are stereotypes and generalizations because of what is the preponderance of evidence, right? And
Agreed.
certainly in some countries, in extreme cases, you see these examples really played out, and fundamentalism is fundamentally the problem in almost every case. Now, we do have very righteous and religious people that fall into many of these different religions, and they're doing what they know to do, I think. But I tell you, there's a lot that we can. This world, if you look across civilizations and cultures, and you deal with that kind of thing, if you look at it from that perspective, we've all got a long way to go in treatment of women and around the world. I think we happen to live, in a country where a lot of these values and so forth are really principles are already in place, and it's illegal to go against them. But that still doesn't stop the people you describe, like who run around and abuse women. I mean, those kind of people are outliers.
Correct. And as I see in the chat, people are talking about other fundamentalists like the Amish, like Worldwide Church of God. If you were a woman, you were nobody. If
Yeah.
you weren't married, you were nothing. If you didn't have a husband, you were nothing.
Yeah.
So and I think you're right that it's fundamentalism when you try to get back to the whatever it is that you consider the first or the best or whatever, you become hard-nosed or hard-hearted or whatever it is. But the women and children seem to suffer.
Yeah.
The men seem to get off scot-free. But when Christ came, or I know this is not a Christian forum, but he didn't ask when the woman was caught in adultery, when it was all said and done, he said, woman, where are your accusers?
Yeah.
They left. I mean, he gave women a fair shake. But then he also called the Canaanite woman a bitch, a dog, when she came to him and asked for help.
What translation are you using?
Sorry. And she said to him, yes, master, but even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table.
Yeah, we get certain traces in the Hebrew Bible, in the New Testament as well, glimpses into what we would see as a sort of a development of more freedom and so forth. So for instance, like in the book of Numbers in Bamidbar, you get this idea where the daughters of Zelophehad come forward and say, hey, look, I know the rule and I know how this property is supposed to pass from generation to generation, but what about us? In this case, we're sort of an outlier to the rule because, we don't have a father, whatever. And so you begin to see property rights can be handed to, women can be involved in that. And we see in the Hebrew Bible, we have women who operate and function as judges, not just Deborah, but we have prophetess here and there, and we had. So in other words, it's you see things like this, and it does suggest that women are even though you can read the biblical text in such a way as to say, well, some texts indicate that women were considered property, and people can debate all of those details. I know, but ideally, you do begin to see that the Bible can and has been used to advance certain rights of groups such as women. I think that all of these, in fact, one of the funnier memes that I've seen recently showed it was talking about the case where the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, who is making small strides, it would seem, towards certain rights of people that haven't had rights, mainly women. And it said that women were now beginning to be allowed to drive. And the meme had several Israeli Air Force women, and they're standing with their arms crossed, and the bubble above them said, "Oh, how nice, they finally let you drive." And behind them, there's this jet airplane, like they're flying jets. So they're a
Yep,
little bit
I've
ahead of the
seen that.
curve. So, but I do get your point, and I think that as we look at these texts, and we look at the world around us, yes, there are people within all of the different faiths, whether Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, who represent sort of the best of their group. And then we have maybe a larger group in each one of these different divisions who aren't really good examples. One quick story I heard: there was a couple who were brought up, who were Christian, and they were leaving Christianity. They wanted to convert to Judaism. And went to see this rabbi, and they asked the rabbi, would he convert them? And the rabbi said, well, why do you want to convert? And they said, well, we're just tired of the hypocrisy in Christianity. We don't believe it anymore. We've left Christianity. And they went, on and on, really started sort of bringing to the rabbi the worst case of all the Christians they had ever seen. And he said, I tell you what, he said, I'm going to give you a book. And if you read this book, at the end of reading the book, if you still want to convert, come back and see me. And he handed them a book called The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I don't know if any of you have read that book, but
I have read that book.
And so and so the rabbi was telling the story at a conference I was at, and I asked him what happened. He said, I never saw him again. And so I think, and his point to them was never judge an entire group by the worst among them. Let's give them the benefit. And so when I hear what you say about certain Islamists and, their dedication to their faith, those are the very good things. We can learn from those. We can learn from certain good traits in these various faiths. But our task, our mission, if we will, is to not accept the bad and go with the good. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And
Yep.
I would also like to address something I see in the chat. Any woman or any man who has a girl child, regardless of what ethnicity they are, and they allow that girl child to grow up and dress like a whore, to display all of her charms from a very young age, are doing a terrible disservice to that child. No man should have to be forced to continually avert his eyes because women are running around dressed half naked. That's the woman's fault. She's not asking to be raped, but she's certainly asking for something, whether it's ignorance or bad child rearing or bad mothering and fathering, I don't know. But I'm appalled when I see some young women. Makes me want to put a burqa or a nun's habit on.
Yeah.
Just in, forget the word, protest. I mean, it's appalling that we have allowed that to happen. And I'm looking forward to the day when people of both sexes dress appropriately.
Modesty. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In all things. The
Yeah.
middle of the road.
That's
Never
right.
hurt anybody.
All right. Well, hang
And I'm
around,
done.
Carolyn. Hang
I'm
around.
done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And Todd and Angel, how are you guys today? Good to see you. Wait. Now.
Are we good?
You good, man? I hear you. How are
Are
you?
we live as a Memorex?
You are live, brother.
Shabbat Shalom.
Hey, Shabbat Shalom.
A couple little comments. One about what Karen said just a little while ago. I didn't realize we were creating our own religion.
Yep.
Oh, well.
Seems
Religion's
so.
man-made anyway.
Yep.
The deal about the translation between mocking and molesting,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to look at that from Sarah's point of view as far as what would be worse to make her cut him off from the camp and everything, just making fun of the kid, or molesting him? I mean, it could be if he was mocking the whole entire time. I can see where that would eventually, get her riled up.
Oh, yeah.
But that would have to be a lot of mocking.
Well, and I think the main point is there are opportunities, as you know, within a text to go beyond what the text says, and maybe for good reason. In other words, your logic is good. Your logic is sound. You don't need me to tell you that, but I think it is to say, well, how much mocking does it take? Well, we have to then look at what are the examples of Sarah's behavior in this situation. So, for instance, by the time you get to chapter 25, it basically reports that all of Abraham's kids, other than her kids, are cast out. So, how much does it take? Now, look, I know this is going to get me in trouble, evidently, with rabbis and who knows what else. But, when we read the story of Sarah, how much is she willing to put up with? Or is she pretty much ready to say, look, get these people out of here? This is, we have a child now, Abraham. We have a child, and this child is going to be the heir. So I think that, Keturah, I mean, at some point you have to look and say, well, what's the common thread here? And now beyond that, let me go ahead and say the elephant in the room. Beyond that is, according to the biblical flow of the documents, our focus is supposed to be focused on Isaac. This is, as the writers want us to see, this is God's will, that Isaac is the one and everybody else has to. Now look, we get the confident saying of the writer, look, you're okay, Ishmael. I'm going to make of you a great nation as well, and you'll have 12 princes and so forth and so on, and you'll be great. But Isaac is the one. So I'm trying to be balanced here, but I'm also suggesting that when we look at the text, and the text is, the word is based on the idea of laughing or joking around. Now, sometimes joking around can be carried way too far.
Mm-hmm.
I think in this case, that may be the case, that Ishmael pushed things way too far. But then the same exact word is used where, the couple are together and people are looking and seeing them and they're joking around. I don't think that has to be molesting. I think that sometimes we say, well, I wouldn't do that unless it was really serious. And then you go, well, what would you consider serious? And somebody goes, molesting. You say, well, is that what the word means? No, not really, but I just like to think of it that way because the story makes more sense that way. You see my point. I get it. For whatever reason, kids thrown out.
First, now the interesting thing that I've never heard anybody bring up about that situation, she put herself in that position.
Who did say that?
Sarah did. She put herself in that position when she told Abraham, "Here, take my maid or whatever, and have a kid with her. That way, you got a seed." And she put herself in that position.
Yeah,
She can't blame anybody but herself.
it certainly turned out wrong, and I think or bad, and I think in some ways, the lessons that I've heard people teach, and I've done this too, is you look at the story, and we tend to get to know these stories pretty well, and we derive certain things from the text. You're like, well, I mean, did God tell Abraham, you need to, did Abraham question it? Did he turn her away? I think sometimes one of the lessons that I've said, and others, I don't know if I would go with this just like this anymore, but were they trying to rush God's plan? Were they trying to fulfill it in a way other than he had sort of mapped out? And I think that could be derived. You might get that from the text. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see that.
They're like, well, I mean, here we are, we're pushing 100, and I still hadn't had a kid, and she's saying, here's her handmaid Hagar. I don't know. I mean, those are some thoughts. That's just some ideas. But the bottom line is, you do have Ishmael in the story. It does present problems, but we see throughout the biblical text, especially the patriarchal narratives, really, that this many wives or more than one wife, and you start adding more complexity to the family dynamic, and it gets hard. You look at what we'll see when we get into Israel. I mean, it's pretty tough. I mean, it gets bad. So,
yeah, I've always heard the theory that the legend of Ishmael is the Arab nation that we have today. And that's the reason they're always having issues with Israel is a simple fact that it's like a birthright. That's just one of the theories I've always heard. I'm not saying that I buy into it, but it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense. I can't argue that it's not.
Certainly, I think that there's something to a lot of that. If to your point, I mean, it does make sense. And one of the things that I often see, and I've been part of a lot of this too, is you see the map where Abraham is promised, these are the lands that I'm going to give to you and your seed. And so what people begin to do is they go, well, this is greater Israel. This is going to be the boundaries of Israel. And that's the way people mostly view that. But I have come to appreciate that not all of those lands are the boundaries of Israel, but they include the descendants of Abraham through his other women as well, Ishmael and Keturah's descendants and so forth. So what we find is that there are boundaries, different maps, if you will, that are described within the biblical text, and I think it's important that we kind of get that straight. So there has to be. This is why I love, and I know not everybody agrees with Ross. I got that. But I love the Abraham Accords. I've read just about everything that I can find on Middle East and current geopolitical this and that. And I'm very, very interested to see if that's going to come back on the scene. I don't mean to derail our subject, but when we talk about, when we talk about the modern descendants, that's something I look forward to. It is now, one second, Todd, it is now 12:30. This is as good a time as any for us to say shalom to our friends in YouTube. And we're going to stick around in the Zoom call for quite a bit, mainly just to say thank you for everyone who makes it possible for us to do everything that we do. So if you're in the YouTube and you're currently already supporting us, reach out to us if you don't have the link. But come on over to the Zoom call. And for the rest of you, I hope you join me Thursday night with Jono. And if not, I'll see you next Saturday. So Shabbat Shalom. Have a beautiful week. And thanks for joining us today.